Hello, everyone, and welcome to our year-end processing in Microsoft Dynamics SL webinar. We are thrilled that you are able to attend our webinar today. My name is Donna Hurst, and I am the practice director for Velocio for Dynamics SL. I joined Velocio in July, so I likely haven't had an opportunity to meet all of you. So this is our first opportunity, and I'm looking forward to working with each of you in the future. Before we begin, we do have a couple of housekeeping items that I would like to mention. First of all attendees are in listen-only mode. If you do have any questions, please submit them through the GoToWebinar question box. We'll be answering those in our Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And just letting you know, we will be recording today's webinar, and you will receive a recording in our follow-up email tomorrow. Melanie is going to be doing our presentation for us today. And before she gets started, I wanted to tell everyone that we are very excited to announce that Microsoft has informed us that the updates that we're going to be talking about in this webinar for Dynamics SL 2018, both CU3 and year-end updates for Dynamics SL 2018 and SL 2015 are scheduled to be, they're finishing them up right now, they're packaging them up, and they're going to be available to partners and customers next week. So everything that we're going to cover today, these updates will be available for you next week. So again, just a reminder, if you have questions, make sure you chat those and we will definitely get those answered. And now I'd like to go ahead and introduce Melanie Brandeis, and she's going to do our demonstration for us. Melanie.
Thank you, Donna. Welcome, everyone. We've got a lot of great information to cover today, so we'll go ahead and dig right in. On the agenda for today, we're going to take a look at applying the year-end updates, what's included with those, all sorts of good stuff around the year-end updates. We'll also look at some year-end processing, including the payroll module, project controller module, and also the accounts payable module. The Microsoft updates for year-end for 2019 are going to be covering the following Dynamics SL versions. They will include SL 2018, 2018 CU1, 2018 CU2, and 2018 CU3, as well as SL 2015, 2015 CU1, and 2015 CU2. We'll go ahead and begin with the application of these year-end updates that are provided by Microsoft. The first step is to download those via the Microsoft Customer Source or Partner Source website. As Donna had mentioned, those should be available within the next week. The site does require valid credentials to access those downloads. So if you do not have access, go ahead and contact Microsoft directly, reach out to your partners just with getting access to those. Now, once you're on the website, you will select Dynamics SL as the product and then locate the year-end updates for 2019 download. Typically, I believe they're located under the Service Packs area. That could change, but you may also use the search field and just type in SL and 2019 year-end updates. And usually I get a good hit on them that way as well. It'll pop right up for you. Now, install instructions are included within the downloaded zip file. So you want to make sure that you're following the instructions for your specific version of SL. As we noted, they cover a variety of different versions, and sometimes those instructions will differ just slightly depending upon your SL version. I believe in prior years that Microsoft has released a YouTube video that would kind of walk you through the instructions of applying those. So I'm not certain if that's something they're going to do again this year or not, but if you are looking for some assistance, feel free to reach out to Velocio or go ahead and do a search on YouTube for the video. You might find a video out there that will walk you through it as well. You do want to make sure that all users exit Dynamics SL before we apply the updates. And then you want to back up your SL system and application databases as well as any custom reports within your SL installation. As far as the exact installation steps, I unfortunately don't have that information available to me yet, just because they have not been released. But just based on what they've done in prior years, typically they have to be installed directly at the server versus doing that from a workstation. You would want to locate the directory within the download specific to your version of SL, and then there'll be an installation executable that you'll run. Running that will copy new screens and reports, if there's any, to the necessary folders in your SL directory structure. Now, in the past, there's also been a SQL script provided. So you may also need access to SQL Server Management Studio. Sometimes that's only for specific versions, so just watch those installation instructions closely. Now, you may be wondering what all updates are included with these year-end updates that we speak of. Generally speaking, there's going to be any current year reports, any year-end resolutions, or any changes that need to be done to make sure the processing reports are correct. Also, any electronic file changes or any changes to your AP 1099s. Also, any changes with the W-2s. Now, for this year specifically, the information that I have on hand now, and that's subject to change, but it looks like these updates are coming soon, so I'm pretty sure this is pretty spot on. But there's going to be some additional filing statuses within the payroll module to accommodate for higher withholdings. These are all in conjunction with the update changes for the new W-4 form that will be required in 2020. Also, the employee maintenance screen is updated. That's where you're going to see those higher withholdings. And also, there are going to be a set of higher tax tables. There's going to be 4 new ones. Those tax tables themselves are going to be included with the tax table updates, and I'll touch on that a little bit later here. But there'll be additional tax tables for the higher rates. And then there's going to be also in employee maintenance a new dependent claim amount field. This will be considered during the payroll calculation. Also, there's a new message that's added to the employee maintenance screen, and this is just simply a note or an alert to the payroll clerk advising on the correct number of personal exemptions to enter and which set of tax tables to use, whether you're using the standard tables or those with the higher withholdings. And that's all going to be based on the selections made by the employees on their new W-4 forms, okay? As far as the W-2 form, there was a minor change regarding a Box 9 verification code. The title on that box has been removed, and it's no longer used, and then the box will become shaded. The W-3 form that prints at the end of your W-2s, there were no changes required with that. There were also no changes to the W-2 electronic file. In regards to the accounts payable 1099s, there were no changes required there either. I do want to point out, I know there's a lot of stir regarding the W-4 form for 2020 and the newness around all that. With the year-end updates that Microsoft will be providing for SL, Microsoft is only making accommodations within Dynamics SL to support the form W-4 changes based on the requirements for the new 2020 W-4 form. SL itself does not have a W-4 form. It's not going to as part of these year-end updates or anything along those lines. It's just simply accommodating changes required in SL for those forms. So, and then also it works in conjunction with these tax table updates, which is going to become very important. It is recommended that these year-end updates be applied after you have closed the payroll module for the year. There is a year-end update, which I just spoke of, and then also a separate tax table update that will be released by Microsoft. The tax table updates for the new 2020 year should be applied after the payroll module has closed for the current 2019 year. The year-end updates include the information that we previously discussed. These tax table updates are going to provide changes to the tax tables that are used by your deductions for payroll in Dynamics SL. And typically Microsoft releases a few different updates to the tax tables over the course of the year as these tax tables change. At last glance out on Customer Source and Partner Source, the most current tax table update that I found was for September of 2019. That was something relating to the Virginia state, I believe. I want to say they're doing some maintenance out there. I noticed there was a file earlier today also that was dated 12/31 of 2019. It looked like it may be the most recent tax table updates, but upon downloading it, it was still the September 2019 file. So I believe they're doing some work there. Like I said, at last glance, the latest ones were not yet out there. You may need to double check, just download the file, double check the date on it, but it should be something dated December once you get the downloaded zip file. The year-end updates, as Donna advised, those should be coming out next week. So I do want to point out again, this year the year-end updates are going to be dependent on the payroll tax table updates. So these are two separate downloads. This has not been the case in the past that they're dependent upon one another. There have been two downloads like that in the past, but they've never been dependent upon one another. So this year they will be. Very important that we get both of those installed. There are a few items to take into consideration as you're working on your year-end processing in SL. You are required to do calendar year processing in payroll and accounts payable, even if you're on a fiscal year setup. So keep that in mind. You can post entries to prior, let's jump ahead there. You can post entries to prior periods as needed, even if they are closed periods. There is functionality that allows you to do that, but be aware your setup in the General Ledger module must allow for such postings to closed periods and years. So those setup options are under the General Ledger module in the GL setup screen, and that can restrict the user's ability to post to closed periods and years. There could also be third-party add-ons installed on top of Dynamics SL, and those can impact the ability to post back to closed periods and years as well. So if you're getting into the year-end closing and you find you need to make some adjustments to prior periods, or you've closed the year and need to make adjustments to the prior years, just double-check your setups. Even if you have it locked down, there's typically functionality that an administrator might be able to unlock that temporarily to allow you to get those to go back. The W-2 amounts and 1099 amounts are updated based on check date. So the date of those checks is determining what year is going to be updated. Now, you may have noticed that the year-end updates that Microsoft is going to be providing are available for the SL 2015 and 2018 versions. If you do happen to still be running on an SL 2011 version, Plumline Consulting is offering a year-end package for the SL 2011 FP1, 2011 SP2, and 2011 SP3 versions. This is on an annual subscription basis. This will contain all of the same year-end updates that are released for SL 2015 and the 2018 versions by Microsoft. They've just been recreated and packaged for these specific SL 2011 versions. If you'd like some more information on this, you can reach out to us. It's vborak@plumlineconsulting.com. That'll get you through to Plumline for information on that. The pricing for the solution is going to be $1,500 for under 100 employees or vendors, and $2,500 if you're over 100. Please note also, if you are on an SL 2015 version, this is the last year that Microsoft year-end updates will be included in the maintenance plan with Microsoft. Moving on to the payroll module. The typical flow for the year-end processing within the payroll module includes closing the year-end payroll for your GL in the GL closing screen. You want to reconcile the 941 in your unemployment reports. You would print the W-2s to plain paper so that you can review the calculated amounts. And then if any edits are needed, you would edit the W-2 data. You can do that in Employee W-2 History in initialize mode. Also printing the W-2s and then generating the electronic file. We'll go ahead and visit these items in a little bit more detail then. So first you want to confirm that all the data for 2019 has been entered and processed. You can use the payroll batch register report to make sure that all your batches have been released and posted. And then you also want to reconcile your payroll accounts in the payroll module with the general ledger account balances. And I typically recommend the account distribution and GL trial balance reports to assist with that. You want to print any of your period end reports. You might have the 941 quarterly tax worksheet, the unemployment tax worksheet, also your earnings and deductions report are important. So then at this point, once you get through this, you would be ready to do your year-end closing then in payroll. Now this is done in the closing screen within your general ledger module. The December period of your fiscal year is always going to be closed with a closing type of year. So the closing screen, you have a designation of either period or year that you're going to close for. When you're in your fiscal year, whatever period corresponds to the calendar month of December, that's when you're going to choose the closing type of year. When you run that closing for the year, it's going to cycle payroll then to the new calendar year. And then it also creates deductions for the new year and history records for your prior years. And what that does is it allows you to calculate checks for the new calendar year. If you don't cycle that and you try to calculate checks for the new year, you'll get some messages stating that the deductions do not yet exist. So you need to make sure that you run that. You also want to make sure that you clear all calculations in payroll before you close the year. That can cause errors in the new year too if you leave those out there. Again, just an important note to reiterate, you want to make sure you close payroll before you run calculations for the new year. And here I've got a screenshot of the GL closing screen itself. You notice I have highlighted the payroll module. The current fiscal period is 12, and I've made the closing type selection of year. Again, this is assuming in my fiscal year that period 12 corresponds to December. If you're not running on, if your fiscal year doesn't match up to the calendar year, maybe period 6 is December for you. That's when you would make a closing type selection of a year for payroll. If you do happen to make an improper selection, the system is nice enough to warn you that it is not a proper selection. It will not allow you to proceed without making the proper selection. So no harm done. Here we're going to have a high-level overview for the W-2 steps for year-end processing, and we'll go into each of these in more detail next. First, we have the year-end updates applied, and then the W-2s are calculated. The data on your W-2 forms would be reviewed. You want to make sure the information contained on them is accurate, and then make any edits or corrections as needed. At that point, you would print the W-2 forms, and then last, you would create the electronic file. And that's if you're going to be filing electronically. Once the year-end updates have been applied, you're ready to move forward with doing your W-2 calculations. You would open up the W-2 calculation screen. This is going to be within your payroll module, and you would choose the current W-2 year. You would select the pay groups that you wish to calculate for. That's done in the box in the upper right corner of the window. As you select the pay groups, the employees contained within those groups are going to populate the lower grid section of the screen. You select off the employees that you wish to calculate the W-2s for, and then click Begin Processing. And after you click Begin Processing, it's going to go through and populate the tables needed to print the W-2 forms, and also create the electronic file if you're going to be filing electronically. Let's take a deeper look at reviewing the data and the calculations for those W-2s. Once the calculation has been completed, you can print the forms to review the data for each employee. You may opt to print those to file, and you could open it up with Word. You could print it to plain paper, however you choose to do so, but you can use those options before you actually print on your actual form, so you're not using those up. You can also print to the plain paper copy format. That format is going to print the boxes for you. You can also use the W-2 employee history screen, which is what I have a screenshot of here for you. This will allow you to pull up individual employees. You would specify the employee ID in the calendar year that you wish to look at their data for, and you can glance at what their numbers are. So this is helpful in troubleshooting as well. Now, if you determine that corrections need to be made to the W-2s, we first want to try to determine what's causing it to be incorrect. And there's several potential causes for that. One would be, is it the federal wages that appear to be incorrect? If so, then go and check for any earnings types that might be set up incorrectly. Identify any missing exemptions that should exist. And if any items like this are found, you want to make sure first that you correct the setup, and then you can rerun the W-2 calculation process and review those amounts again. Now, if it's the state wages that appear to be incorrect, again, we also want to identify earnings types that may be set up incorrectly. Also identify any missing exemptions that maybe should exist. Now with this, though, if any items are found, The options for resolving it is going to include using initialize mode to correct the year-to-date subject wages in employee history. So you would correct that there and then rerun the W-2 calculation process. Or use initialize mode to correct the state wages in employee W-2 history, but do not recalculate the W-2s. So it kind of depends on what scenario we're following under here. I do urge you to use caution if and when you opt to use initialize mode, as that's giving you access to fields that are normally disabled in the system. So if there's any doubt at all, please, please, please reach out to us, and we can help advise the best route to take in correcting that sort of stuff. Now, if a tax amount is found to be incorrect, we would want to determine the cause of the problem. Is the issue with the federal, state, or local taxes? With that, we would make sure that your federal deductions are properly coded as a type of federal in the deduction maintenance screen. Along the same route, if it's a state deduction, those should be properly coded as a type of state in the deduction maintenance. And also, it has to have the appropriate two-letter state code coded on it. And then any local taxes, those are to be set with a type of local, and it also needs to have the appropriate two-letter state code entered on it. And that's all done in the deduction maintenance screen. Now, if you have tax amounts that were not taken properly, typically we can just initialize the tax amounts to be correct. Again, I urge you to use caution when using initialize mode. Some important notes across the board. It's important that we correct any setup issues to avoid problems the following year. So if we know there was a setup issue and it caused issues for 2019, we need to make sure we resolve that setup issue so that going forward in 2020, that doesn't arise as a problem again in 2020 for you. And then, as I said, use extreme caution using initialize mode to modify employee history, anything. Always reach out if there's question or concern there. Here are some items to make note of with the W-2 calculation process. It can be run at any time. You can do it before or after your year-end close has been completed, just as long as history is being retained for the year that you wish to calculate for. I typically recommend going ahead and calculating the W-2s even before the year's over. Just go ahead and get that calculation process going. Start reviewing those numbers. You can test them out, see what they're shaping up to be, kind of get a feel for where things are at. And then after the last check of the year has been ran, you can rerun that W-2 calculation process again. If you happen to have any inactive employees that have had earnings and deductions for that year, they can be calculated and printed as well. If you happen to have an earnings type or a deduction amount that it needs to be printed in a specific box number on the W-2s, you would want to use the W-2 control tab on the earnings type maintenance screen or the deduction maintenance screen to indicate the box number and or letter that will print in. Now keep in mind, if you've already closed your calendar year, you would want to use the deduction history screen versus the deduction maintenance screen to access and modify the record for the 2019 year, and that will make sure it impacts that year's W-2s. Also, again, if that's a setup type issue, if you've already closed the year, make sure you fix it in 2019 in deduction history, and also fix it in deduction maintenance to impact 2020 and forward. If the employee W-2 history screen is used to modify any of that W-2 information using initialize mode, and the W-2 calculation process is reran after that, it will, by default, override all those changes that were made in initialize mode. So if you have made changes in initialize mode and you want those changes to remain intact, be sure that you click the option on the W-2 calculation screen to protect edited W-2 information. You want to make sure you check that off before you rerun the calculation process, and that'll just make sure that that information stays intact for you. On another note, if you're missing a state employer ID, you would want to go to the deduction maintenance screen on the W-2 control tab, populate that there. If it happens to be a federal employer ID number you're missing on the form, you can go to the company maintenance screen and populate that. The W-2 Forms report within the Payroll module is what's used to print the W-2s. SL does not have the copy 1 and 2 report formats, but you can use the copy D instead. And SL uses a standard 2-part form and also offers a 4-part or 4-up format as well. You can obtain pre-printed forms from a company called Deluxe. They have been providing these forms for years for SL, and they line up quite nicely with the W-2 forms that print out of Dynamics SL. You can also print your own forms using the copy A, B, C, and D formats. These formats are what we refer to as the plain paper copies, and they will actually print with the boxes as well as the numbers for you. Copy A is the federal copy, and that must be in the scannable red ink. But the copies B, C, and D, it's not required for those to be in that red ink. We would use the Generate W-2 electronic file screen to create the file that you can provide to the IRS with your W-2 information when you're filing electronically. There's some fields that need to be populated on there, including the calendar year and also the path to the file that you're going to create. And you can change the path to the file easily. Just make note of where you're saving that to, because that's going to be the file that you need to send to the IRS. There's a transmitter PIN number provided by the SSA that you would populate on screen. Also, your contact information. The company identification fields, those default in from the company maintenance screen in SL, but those can be overridden as needed on the screen directly. So if you want to make sure it defaults in correctly next time, trace it back to company information, address any items that are incorrect in there. It'll default improperly for you next time. Or, like I said, go ahead and just override it directly on the screen, but it will default in incorrectly the next time you open the window if you change it in there. Once you hit begin processing on that screen, it's going to create a file called irstax.001, and this is the file that will be provided to the IRS. You can open that up in Notepad if for some reason you need to glance over anything in there. But you would follow the instructions provided by the SSA for transmitting that file. The file format that's produced by SL is usable by a program called AccuAge. AccuAge is a free software that's provided by the SSA to check the electronic file for formatting accuracy. It'll identify common format errors in the wage submissions, and it just helps reduce submission rejections. Now, I do alert you, it could be rejected for other errors. It also does not verify names or social security numbers, that sort of stuff. Moving on to the project controller module. The steps for year-end processing in Project Controller include making sure that all the data has been entered for the current period, and also that all the other modules have been closed for the current period in the General Ledger closing screen. It's easy to make mistakes in your processing. I guess when you're doing, say, your allocations, your billing, maybe approving time. For example, you might have time cards that have not been approved, and those will post to the new period, regardless of what period you have in week maintenance. So in order to help with these sorts of things, it's recommended you make sure the following items have been reviewed and processed as needed before we proceed with closing in the Project Controller module. We want to make sure that you review the time cards. You want to complete your labor commitment load, GL labor posting, and the pay labor interface. Continuing on, we want to review the expense reports, run your FTT process, complete any revenue recognition and allocation processor, execute your billing transaction load, complete the invoicing, and then at that point, you could proceed with running the close. Now, the Project Controller module is a little bit different than the other modules in SL. This one, there's a separate screen. I'll touch on that here in a little bit. But the project module, it also gets closed at the end of each fiscal period or year. So there's two options there, just like we have in the General Ledger closing screen. But this one is done in the close period screen, which is in the Project Controller module itself. So it's not done in General Ledger as we do with the other modules in SL. And this screen is going to do a set of control tests when we process. It's going to check that, make sure that all your submodules have posted to the projects, that the accounting modules are closed to any additional entries. It makes sure all project charge batches are posted. And if any exceptions are found, that closing process can be blocked. Also, it reviews the time cards, and a warning message will appear containing the number of unposted items that are being carried forward. So sometimes the screen will present warnings. Other times you may see errors, but warning messages will not prevent you from proceeding with the close. It's just alerting you to something. If it's an error, though, it will prevent you from moving forward with the closing. Errors must be resolved before it'll let you proceed. Now, if the close period screen detects that the current period is also the last period in your fiscal year, the title of the Begin Processing button changes to Begin Year-End Close, and it automatically knows to close the year for you. If a year-end close takes place, your balance forward amounts are calculated for your projects, and they have their balance forward switch on. If they have that on, the summary records then will be written for the new year for you. Here we have the close period screen. Again, I said this is a little bit different than the GL closing screen in that it automatically detects for you whether you're doing a period close or a year-end close. Here we have the system showing the current period is period 11 and the next period is period 12, so we're clearly not at the end of our year yet. The button at the bottom just says Begin Processing, so it's just closing a period at that point. Make note here, though, if the current period is 12 and the next period is period 1, it recognizes that you've reached the year end and the button becomes Begin Year-End Close. So it automatically picks up on that for you. There's no different selection or a specific type you have to set in there. Prior to closing, it is important to review the project maintenance records for any of your open projects. Any open projects that you have that should have their balance carried forward, you want to make sure that they have the balance forward at year-end option selected. So balance forward at year-end is going to determine whether the year-end total of your project's budget and actuals are rolled forward as the beginning balance for the coming year during that year-end closing process. Now, projects that span multiple fiscal years, they should have that checkbox selected so that the ending balance is rolled forward to the next year. For annual projects or those that are budgeted each year without regard to the previous year, that checkbox should be cleared so that the beginning balance is set to 0 then for the next year. Now, if the year is closed and some projects were not marked as balance forward, but they should have been, the balances can be corrected by changing the current period in the project controller setup screen. You would set that current period back to the last period of the previous year. Go ahead and mark the balance forward option in the project maintenance screen, and then run the closing process again, and it'll roll those forward for us. So it's a little bit forgiving for us in that it lets us go back and reset that to the last period of your prior year. You can make the proper selection on the project maintenance side and rerun that process. A couple other important things. You want to review the fiscal period maintenance to set up the fiscal periods for your new year. And also in time and expense, you want to review the week maintenance to set up the week ending dates for your new year. Now we'll take a look at steps for year-end processing in accounts payable. You want to review your open AP files. You can print your AP batch register report and review the statuses of your batches there. You just want to look for any batches that might need to be processed yet. Also want to post your transactions in the GL post-transaction screen on the General Ledger module. You can print the vendor period trial balance and the period sensitive aged AP reports, and then tie these out to the balances on your GL trial balance report out of the General Ledger module. If you happen to be using recurring entries in accounts payable, make sure all those have been generated, they've been released, posted on the General Ledger site as well. You can print your check register report and your aged AP report, so you have that information on hand. And at that point, then you would be able to go ahead and close the year This is done in the GL closing screen. And also there's an added step on the AP side to close the 1099 calendar year, to roll the two open 1099 years forward 1 year. We'll touch on that here next. So the 1099 calendar year control screen is what is used to maintain the two open 1099 years that SL allows us to have at any given time. Your 1099 amounts can be updated using initialize mode. That's done directly in the AP vendor maintenance screen. There's a 1099 info tab in there. And if you happen to find any 1099 amounts that are off, we would simply go into initialize mode, access the screen, and change the dollar amounts there. Those fields are what's printing on your 1099 forms. Your 1099 amounts are calculated based on the check date paying the 1099 coded voucher. So assume you have a 1099 vendor. As the vouchers are entered for that 1099 vendor, they're coded with a 1099 box number. As the checks are issued that pay those vouchers, the date of those checks is going to determine when your 1099 amounts are updated. There is an AP integrity check screen within the AP module, and there's an option on there that allows you to rebuild 1099 amounts. This functionality is only going to work when vendors were properly coded as 1099 vendors. They had vouchers properly coded with 1099 box numbers also. So such setup changes are not going to be retroactive. There's a 1099 preview report in Accounts Payable. This report is going to show all vendors that are marked as 1099 vendors, regardless of the amounts that have been paid to them. They may not have had any amounts paid to them. If they're set up as a 1099 vendor, they're going to be on the 1099 preview report. The 1099 forms report, though, however, is only going to print forms for those vendors that have hit the limit and require a form to be printed for them. So just please be aware of the changes between the differences between the two of those. The 1099 amounts are updated throughout the year. So as I mentioned, you have a voucher that's coded with the 1099 box number. You issue a check to pay those vouchers. That amount paid to them is automatically going to accumulate as a 1099 amount. There are no extra processes required to print or generate 1099 amounts, nothing like that, like we have with the W-2s on the payroll side. Only time you might need to run a process with this is if you're generating an electronic file to send to the IRS with this information. In the Accounts Payable module, you go under Reports, and you'll see the 1099 Forms report there. I mentioned before, you can preview using the 1099 preview. Just be aware that's all vendors regardless of the limit. The Forms report, though, itself, it can be printed as many times as needed. It's not a one-and-done type thing. I think that's all on that one. We'll go ahead and look here at the 1099 years. I had mentioned that the system allows you to have two open 1099 years at any given time. Typically, the prior year is left open, and then the current year is open as well. So for example, 2018 might remain open as well as 2019. And then as we roll into the 2020 fiscal year, we would roll the 1099 year so that 2019 and 2020 are the two open years. When you print your 1099 forms, though, whatever the oldest year is, that's what the system defaults to. I'll show you here. So we have two open years. The oldest year is what the 1099 forms will default to printing. If I had, let's assume though I have 2018 and 2019 as my two open years, if I just opened the 1099 forms report and clicked print, it would print for 2018. If I want to print for the most current of my two open years, I need to go to the Options tab and click on the next 1099 year option. That forces the forms to print for my most current 1099 year that I have open. If you're in doubt, you can open the 1099 calendar year control screen. You see the screenshot here shows us what the current 1099 year is, as well as what the next 1099 year is. This screen is also used to purge the oldest 1099 year and roll them forward 1 year. This has to be done to be able to print checks for a specific year. So if I had this set up 2018 and 2019 as my 2 open years, and I tried to issue a check in accounts payable that had a date of 2020, the system would not let me proceed. It would give me a message saying that the date has to be an open 1099 year. That's your indicator to come out to this window and purge the oldest year and make sure then that 2019 and 2020 are my 2 open years. If it's determined that the 1099 information is not accurate, maybe you had a voucher that wasn't coded with the 1099 box number. Maybe the vendor wasn't flagged as a 1099 vendor for the whole year and they should have been. Any changes that you make to that sort of setup is only going to impact the system going forward. It's not retroactive. But we are able to come into the vendor maintenance screen on the 1099 info tab while in initialize mode, and we can edit these 1099 amounts on a vendor by vendor maintenance or vendor by vendor basis. You'll notice here that I am in initialize mode, and in doing so, it gives us access to fields that are normally disabled. So the 2 columns of data in the bottom half of the screen there, it's 2018 and then I have 2019 highlighted. Those fields are normally disabled. They're grayed out. We can't change them. Since I'm in initialize mode, I'm able to come in here and make edits. Now, initialize mode is an access rights thing. Your user in SL has to have access rights to use initialize mode in this window. But we can come in here and key in the appropriate amount for whichever box number. The amounts that are in these boxes are what prints directly on your 1099 forms report. There's a Generate 1099 electronic file screen that's used to create the file containing the 1099 amounts to be submitted electronically to the IRS. You can generate for either of the 2 open 1099 years. You'll notice in my screenshot here, the top left corner has a pane for calendar year. So we would select which year we want to generate the file for. And then some other fields that are required, there's the vendor PIN number and contact information, which I'll jump over to that tab in a minute here. So on this window specifically, we're going to put the calendar year, the top right corner, what vendors do we want to include. The bottom half of the window there is your output path of where the file is going to be created. So make note of where that file is being created. And then the transmitter tab here, this has your vendor PIN number and just general contact information so that if there are any questions on the file that you submit, they've got someone to reach out to. The control code at the top of this tab, this comes from the IRS. Most of the rest of this information populates from your company maintenance screen in SL. So if something looks incorrect as it defaulted in, you can trace that back to the company maintenance screen and tweak that so that it's accurate. You can also just override, the information directly on this window. It will not write back to company maintenance though for you. And some general tips on AP 1099 processing in regards to a system message 532. This can be received if you're trying to print checks if the check date year is not an open 1099 year. That's the one I referenced that you would want to go back to the 1099 calendar year control screen to purge the oldest year and make sure that your check date year is an open 1099 year. If your 1099 balances are incorrect for a particular vendor, you can use the initialize mode to correct them in vendor maintenance. And there's also the integrity check that will rebuild 1099 amounts. That assumes that your setup has been accurate over the course of the year, though, for that to have any impact. If you happen to run into a scenario where the 1099 year was purged too many times on accident or maybe too early, you can reach out to Velocio or Microsoft support, whomever, for assistance with some SQL updates that can be utilized to reset those years back for you and make sure that the 1099 amounts for those are rebuilt. So there's ways to get around that. I just urge you to use caution when you're in that calendar year control screen Sometimes there's multiple people responsible for running that process. Maybe someone else has already ran it. You open the screen and just double check the values on screen before we click begin processing. Make sure it does definitely need advanced. That wraps up everything I had. If you have any questions, feel free to submit those on the questions pane on the meeting console window. If after our session has ended, you happen to have any questions, you could submit those to your CSM, which should align to one of the 3 individuals on screen here for you.
Thank you, Melanie. Appreciate all of that great information. We did have one question that popped into the question pane, and that was, I think that you actually answered it after the question was posted, but we'll reiterate it just to make sure that everybody saw that. The question was, do these updates apply to Dynamics SL 2011? And the answer to that is no, but Plumline does have an add-on available for the year end for the SL 2011. So if you haven't yet upgraded and you're still running 2011, contact your CSM and they can get you more information and go over the pricing with you for getting those year-end updates so that you'll be all in compliance. If anybody else has any questions, that was the only one that was currently in the pane. And if not, then we will give you 15 minutes of your day back. And thank you so much for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar.